TJ shaped the earth into mounds, ready to receive them. 3 mounds lying in a straight line along the edge of the grass plot. We had just about decided that we'd have to buy the seeds if we were to get them. It was a violation of our principles, but we were anxious to get the watermelons started. Somewhere or other, TJ got his hands on a seed catalog and brought it one evening to our roof garden. "We can order 'em now," he said, showing us the catalog. "Look." We all crowded round, looking at the fat green watermelons pictured in full color on the pages. Some of them were split open, showing the red, tempting meat, making our mouths water. "Now we got to scrape up some seed money," TJ said, looking at us. "I got a quarter. How much you all got?" We made up a couple dollars among us, and TJ nodded his head. "That'll be more than enough. Now we got to decide what kind to get. I think them Klecky sweets. What do you all think?" He was going into esoteric matters beyond our reach. We hadn't even known there were different kinds of melons. We just nodded our heads and agreed that yes, we thought the Klecky sweets too. "I'll order 'em tonight," TJ said. "We ought to have 'em in a few days." "What are you boys doing up here?" an adult voice said behind us. It startled us, for no one had come up here before, and all the time we'd been using the roof of the factory. We jerked around and saw 3 men standing near the trapdoor at the other end of the roof. They weren't policemen or night watchmen, but 3 men in plump business suits looking at us. They walked towards us. "What are you boys doing up here?" the one in the middle said again. We stood still, guilt heavy among us, levied by the tone of voice, and looked at the 3 strangers. The men stared at the grass flourishing behind us. "What's this?" the man said. "How'd this get up here?" "Sure's grown good, ain't it?" TJ said conversationally. "We planted it." The men kept looking at the grass as if they didn't believe it. It was a thick carpet over the earth now, a patch of deep greenness, startling in the sterile, industrial surroundings. "Yes, sir," TJ said proudly. "We toted that earth up here and planted that grass." He fluttered the seed catalog. "And we're just fixing to plant some watermelons." The man looked at him, then, his eyes strange and far away. "What do you mean, putting this on the roof of my building?" he said. "Do you want to go to jail?" TJ looked shaken. The rest of us were silent, frightened by the authority of his voice. We had grown up aware of adult authority, of policemen and night watchmen and teachers, and this man sounded like all the others. But it was a new thing to TJ. "Well, you wasn't using the roof," TJ said. He paused a moment and added shrewdly, "So we thought we'd just pretty it up a bit." "And sag it so I'd have to rebuild it," the man said sharply. He started turning away, saying to another man beside him, "See that all that junk is shoveled off by tomorrow." "Yes, sir," the man said. TJ started forward. "You can't do that," he said. "We toted it up here. It's our earth. We planted it and raised it and toted it up here." The man stared at him coldly. "But it's my building," he said, "and it's to be shoveled off tomorrow." "It's our earth," TJ said desperately. "You ain't got no right." The men walked on, without listening, and descended clumsily through the trapdoor. TJ stood looking after them, his body tense with anger, until they had disappeared. They wouldn't even argue with him. He wouldn't let them defend his earth rights. He turned to us. "We won't let him do it," he said fiercely. "We'll stay up here all day tomorrow, and the day after that, and we won't let him do it." We just looked at him. We knew there was no stopping it. He saw it in our faces, and his face wavered for a moment before he gripped it into determination. "They ain't got no right," he said. "It's our earth. It's our land. Can't nobody touch a man's own land." We kept looking at him, listening to the words, but knowing it was no use. The adult world had descended on us, even in our richest dream, and we knew there was no calculating the adult world, no fighting it, and no winning against it. We started moving slowly toward the parapet and the fire escape, avoiding a last look at the green beauty of the earth that TJ had planted for us, had planted deeply in our minds as well as in our experience. We filed slowly over the edge and down the steps to the plank, TJ coming last, and all of us could feel the weight of his grief behind us. "Wait a minute," he said suddenly, and his voice harsh with the effort of calling. We stopped and turned, held by the tone of his voice, and looked up at him standing above us on the fire escape. "We can't stop him," he said, looking down at us, his face strange in the dusky light. "There ain't no way to stop him?" "No," Blackie said with finality. "They own the building." We stood for a moment, looking up at TJ, caught into inaction by the decision working in his face. He stared back at us, and his face was pale and mean in the poor light, with a bald nakedness in his skin like cripples have sometimes. "They ain't going to touch my earth," he said fiercely. "They ain't going to land a hand on it. Come on." He turned around and started up the fire escape again, almost running against the effort of climbing. We followed more slowly, not knowing what he intended to do. By the time we reached him, he had seized a board and thrust it into the soil, scooping it up and flinging it over the parapet into the areaway below. He straightened and looked at us. "I can't touch it," he said. "I won't let him lay a dirty hand on it." We saw it then. He stooped to his labor again, and we followed, the gusts of his anger moving in frenzied labor among us as we scattered along the edge of the earth, scooping it, throwing it over the parapet, destroying with anger the growth we had nurtured with such tender care. The soil carried so laboriously upward to the light and sun cascaded swiftly into the dark areaway. The green blades of grass crumpled and twisted in the falling. It took less time than you would think. The task of destruction is infinitely easier than that of creation. We stopped at the end, leaving only a scattering of loose soil, and when it was finally over, a stillness stood among the group and over the factory building. We looked down at the bare sterility of black tar, felt the harsh texture of it under the soles of our shoes, and the anger had gone out of us, leaving us only a sore aching in our minds, like overstretched muscles. TJ stood for a moment, his breathing slowing from anger and effort, caught into the same contemplation of destruction as all of us. He stooped slowly, finally, and picked up a lonely blade of grass left trampled under our feet, and put it between his teeth, tasting it, sucking the greenness out of it into his mouth. Then he started walking toward the fire escape, moving before any of us were ready to move, and disappeared over the edge. We followed him, but he was already halfway down to the ground, going on past the board where we crossed over, climbing down into the areaway. We saw the last section swing down with his weight, and then he stood on the concrete below us, looking at the small pile of anonymous earth scattered by our throwing. Then he walked across the place where we could see him, and disappeared toward the street without glancing back, without looking up to see us watching him. They did not find him for 2 weeks. Then the Nashville police caught him just outside the Nashville freight yards. He was walking along the railroad track, still heading south, still heading home.